Alrighty, so this is the second week in our 5-week workshop series. So last week we covered invasive species in New Jersey, and this week we're going to talk about bat and insect houses. So this one is the only one that's on a Thursday. Composting, rain barrels, and microplastics will be on Fridays at the same time for the subsequent weeks. So in case you weren't here last week, my name is Alorah, and I'm a New Jersey Watershed Ambassador through AmeriCorps. So this is a program that partners up with AmeriCorps as well as the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. And this program has been in the running for about 20 years or so. So part of our service is to go out and educate the public about different aspects of watershed science and different sources of pollution, and as well as other topics that are just overall related to the environment and keeping our water sources clean. As you can see, we also go out into streams and we sample for macroinvertebrates, and that will give us an indicator of the health of a stream. We also do lots of interactive things with the community, such as these webinar series or workshops with like rain barrels and so on. So if this is something you're continuously interested in, feel free to also drop your email in the chat, and I can do my best to keep you in the loop of any upcoming events. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started for today. So we're going to talk about bat and insect houses. First, we're going to talk about bats and bat houses, and then we'll talk about insect houses. So prior to really researching bats, I didn't know too much about them, and I really have come to fall in love with bats. So I hope that this will kind of enlighten you about bats, and maybe you'll love them by the end of this too. So they're very small mammals. Some of them can be quite large as well. There's more than 1,300 species worldwide, with about 70% of them being carnivorous, meaning they eat insects. And the rest of them, which is about 30%, are fruit and nectar feeders. And you'll find those bats more in like Asia and Africa. So some fun facts about bats are that they're the only mammals that are capable of true flight, and they're one of the only predators to night-flying insects. And contrary to maybe what you've heard in the past, they are not blind. They actually have very good eyesight, and they're adapted to see in low-light conditions, and they're particularly skilled with echolocation, which is basically the skill they have where they send out high energy signals, and those waves bounce off of insects or whatever might be in their environment, and they bounce back, come back to their ears, and that allows them to very precisely locate different food sources or where they're going. So they're not blind, they're actually very good at navigating their environment. So over here, you'll see a picture of a silver-haired bat. This is one of the bats we get in New Jersey. I think this bat is particularly cute, and so I figured I'd zoom in. Look at his little snooter and his eyes. So cute. A little more about their anatomy, though. So they're basically little mammals that have the ability to fly, and they're much like humans in that they have joints. So their arms and their legs are jointed much like ours are. So they have elbows, they have thumbs, they have wrists, they have fingers. But you'll see here that their thumbs are very small, and then their fingers are significantly longer. They also have a tail, and everything is connected by a very thin membrane of skin. And this is what allows them to fly. So they use their thumbs basically as like hooks, and so they'll use those to hang on to trees and different kinds of substrates. So just like a front view of them, you'll see the very long fingers. They have a tail as well, fingers and toes. And then bats also have very good hearing. So some of them have smaller ears, and some of them also have really, really big ears. And so they use that to navigate their environment. So I'm going to talk more specifically about northern bats because we're in the north. Overall, bats are nocturnal, but the bats here in the north, they mate prior to hibernating. So they will go out and they'll mate July through September, and the female is going to store the sperm until she ovulates in the springtime, and then that egg will become fertilized and she'll later give birth to a pup. So hibernation is going to happen after mating, and that's in mid-October until about the first or second week of April, which is kind of funny that we associate bats with Halloween, because they're usually hibernating during Halloween. Once they're out of their winter hibernation, they're going to go out in the spring, and then they're going to form these maternity colonies during the summer. So the females are going to kind of like live together in these big colonies and take care of their pups together. So when you have bats moving into bat houses and you see a whole bunch of bats, chances are that those are all females. The males tend to live more on their own and not in these colonies. Every year, the female is going to give birth to 1 to 4 pups, and this happens in late May to early June. But more often than not, they're only giving birth to 1 pup. And the average lifespan of these bats is usually 4 to 6 years, but there have been reports for some bats living into their 30s and 40s. So that's pretty amazing. But this also, the way that they reproduce is having 1 pup per year on average is limiting to their population as well. So I also wanted to go a little more into hibernation because this is a really important part of their life cycle. So they're going to hibernate in caves and mines and some attics, if maybe you have bats in your attic. And they do that because they can be isolated in these conditions, they can huddle together, and they're going to up the temperature to stay warm throughout the winter. Some bats are going to migrate to warmer climates during the winter, but we have several bat species that stay here, so they're going to hibernate in caves. There's actually a pretty famous bat cave in Rockaway, I believe it is, and this is a picture of that mine where they live. And during hibernation, they're going to go into torpor, which is basically a state where they significantly reduce their metabolism. So they're going to drop their heartbeat from about 1,000 beats per minute to only about 20 beats per minute. And they're reducing their metabolism so low so that they don't have to eat throughout their hibernation. They're living off the reserves that they created during the summer and fall seasons before they go into hibernation. So if a bat wakes up from its hibernation, chances are that it's not going to survive because the insect populations are not around in the winter, so they might starve if a bat wakes up during their hibernation. And the place where they roost in the winter is called their hibernaculum. And from them huddling together and stuff, their roosting temperatures are around 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Bats also have a lot of ecological services associated with them. So for one, they decrease the need for insecticides because most of them are insectivores. They're going to go out every night and they're going to eat a whole bunch of bugs. This could be on the magnitude of hundreds upwards to maybe even 1,000 every single night. So basically whatever they can get their hands on every night, they're going to eat. Some of the insects that they eat are actually crop pests, so they can really provide a great service for gardens and farms. As well as at night, when they're eating these insects, they're controlling those insect populations that might be annoying to you, for example. Bats are also pollution indicators because they're almost always going to roost in areas that are about a quarter mile away from a reliable water source, such as a stream, river, or lake. And so if there is a bad water source, so maybe it's polluted and that has an effect on the bats, you'll see a reflection of that in the bat population. Since they fly all over the place, they do often help with pollination. This is more so for those fruit bats, especially when it comes to reforestation. Fruit bats are going to eat lots of different fruits which contain seeds, and then those seeds are going to be dispersed through their droppings. So it's estimated that bats provide about $22.9 billion worth of ecosystem services in the US each year, which is pretty amazing. Unfortunately, though, despite all of these great ecosystem services, there's a lot of threats that bats are currently facing, with the biggest one being loss of habitat and habitat fragmentation. So this is basically where we go in and we cut down forests, or different kinds of landscapes, maybe for development or other purposes. In doing so, we get rid of the forest, which is where a lot of them will go catch their food, and also where many bats live. Climate change also has an effect on bats as this changes. We talked about this last week with invasive species. This will change the different climate regimes and might change where the bats can live, and also their food sources. And really prevalent to us here in the north is this disease called white nose syndrome, which is a fungal infection. So you can see in this picture on the left, it looks like they have this like white powder around their noses, and that's a fungal infection. And that really takes a toll on the populations. Other things of concern are roost destruction and overall disturbance. So if you disturb a winter roost, for example, like a hibernating roost, you might again wake those bats up, and they may not be able to survive through the rest of the winter. Also, people, for some reason, when they see bats, maybe they want to like touch them or something like that. You really don't want to touch bats. They don't fare well with humans. They don't particularly interact with humans on a regular basis, since they're nocturnal, and they really are, they're kind of sticking to themselves and not interacting with a lot of other people or things like that. So just to specify more about white nose syndrome. So this was first detected in a cave near Albany, New York. A picture was taken in 2006, but then the first real solid report came out in 2007. And prior to discovering white nose syndrome, we had no idea that this fungus PD even existed. And we don't know where it came from, but we have found it elsewhere in the world, such as in Europe and Asia. There's currently no cure for these infected bats. Some experimental treatments exist. I'm not too sure of the efficacy of that. Unfortunately, this is affecting a lot of our North American bat species. So 12 different species have confirmed cases, and then 6 other species have tested positive for this fungus, but they are not symptomatic, which is also a curious thing. Like why are some bats more severely affected than others? And unfortunately, like this powder you can see on the nose and it's all over the wings, it's going to compromise their overall immune system. And it's also going to cause holes and tears to form in the wings, which is going to affect their ability to fly and to therefore catch food. This very often will wake the bats up from hibernation, and that can result in them dying from starvation. So this is, for us, one of the biggest problems with our bat populations is this white nose syndrome, along with loss of habitat. So if we look at this map, you can see here this little purple dot. This is where it originated in around Albany, New York, and it very quickly in years spread around the state of New York and surrounding states like New Jersey, and over time has spread up into Canada and westwards into the central United States, and even in on the West Coast. So one thing I want to note here is that the fungus, it's not necessarily just spread between the bats, and it's spread very easily because they roost together and they're in close contact. This fungus can be spread by us, right? So maybe we go hiking, or we go into a cave or in some sort of trail, and we might pick that fungus up on our boots or our shoes or our clothes and transport it elsewhere, where the fungus can then take hold and affect bats. So it's really important that when we're traveling between different places, the same applies when we're talking about invasive species and their seed dispersal. We want to make sure that we're cleaning our shoes, especially if we're going out into nature and then traveling elsewhere, because we really want to prevent the spread of this. So because of all of these different factors that are threatening bats, it's important for us to try to conserve their populations, especially given the ecosystem services they provide. And one of the ways we can do that is by building a bat house. So we have in New Jersey 6 year-round bat residents. So these are the ones that do not migrate. We have the big brown bat, the little brown bat, the eastern small-footed bat, tricolored bat, northern long-eared bat, and the Indiana bat. And so the big brown bat and the little brown bat are probably the most common bats you'll come across in New Jersey. Other ones are a little harder to find. But what I do want to point out here is that the northern long-eared bat is a threatened species, and the Indiana bat is an endangered species. Indiana bats, they really like to roost in like hickory trees because that bark kind of peels away from the tree and it creates kind of this little nook they can get up in and stay. So they really like that habitat. So hickory trees are good for Indiana bats especially. And again, because these are species that are threatened and endangered, and that loss of habitat and white nose syndrome are all affecting these species, providing a bat house is a good way to give their population a boost if we can. We also have 3 part-time bat residents. So we have the Hoary Bat, the Eastern Red Bat, and the Silver-haired Bat. This was the one I showed on the first slide. The Hoary Bat is this one right here. On batcon.org, which I highly recommend everybody checks out, this bat is described as the most handsome bat in North America. And I think I really agree with that. He's a very cute bat. And they're also the only native terrestrial animals to Hawaii, which is pretty amazing. And that's the Hoary Bat. The Eastern Red Bat is right here, which is also a very cute bat. They're also a lot smaller than you might imagine. And so these are the ones that are going to migrate in the winter to warmer climates. So if that hasn't already convinced you to build bats a nice little house, I decided that it might be good for you to have things in common with bats so that you relate to them and want to build them a house. So one thing you might have in common with bats is a glow up. If you're anything like me, when you were younger, you were not so cute. But then over time, you had a nice glow up and became significantly cuter. I'm not sure, this picture scares me a little bit, it's a little weird, but look how cute that bat is. You might also be irritable, especially when bothered. Bats really don't like to be touched by people or bothered by other organisms. Maybe you're also an excellent listener, but like to be left alone, much like the bat. As you can see, this one's got very big ears and they have excellent echolocation, but again, bats do not like to be bothered. And this one, I know I significantly relate to this. Maybe you're also a midnight snacker. You eat all night long, that's me. And this is a fruit bat eating some bananas, which is very adorable. There's a whole video of this bat on YouTube eating bananas. It is incredibly adorable and I highly recommend looking at it. So here's a vine. I really enjoy this one and I hope you do too.
Look it! It's freaking bats. I love Halloween. Look.
Why do you like Halloween so much?
It's always Halloween in my soul.
So from now on, like that little girl is so cute. Bats are amazing and I can get on her level with appreciating them. So now that we have the background in bats, I'm going to explain how to build a bat house. So I'm going to give kind of more general supplies needed and general construction outline. So you're going to need, this is really important, non-pressure treated wood. And it needs to be outdoor quality because it's going to be outside. So you're going to want to use a plywood, cedar, or pine. You do need to paint the bat house, so you want to use a water-based paint, and in the north you're going to want to use a black or a brown paint, as this is going to help the bat house stay warm and help with the temperature regulation. Definitely going to need screws and or nails, a table or handsaw, drill, paintbrush, tape measure, and latex caulk. Optionally, you'll need a water-based exterior quality dark stain for the interior of the bat house, and you can also add roof shingles if you'd like, but that's not necessary. So the general bat house should be at least 2 feet tall. So that's a really important measure, at least 2 feet tall. It can be bigger and it can also be wider. So at minimum, you want it to be about 16 inches wide, but they have shown that wider bat houses are more successful than smaller ones. So taller, wider bat houses seem to be more efficient at recruiting bat colonies. You need to have a landing pad at the bottom of the bat house, and this is because the bats kind of need a place to kind of stick to so they can crawl up into the bat house. The front panels, so this top one's going to vary in dimension, but this bottom one should be 6 inches tall. And in between the top and the bottom front panels, you should have a 1/2 inch gap so that air can get into and out of the bat house. So this is going to help with temperature regulation. On a side profile, what you'll see is like the bat, they hit the landing pad. This is the landing pad, and then they move upwards into the house. So the width of the house is also going to depend on how many baffles you put in. So a baffle is basically like a room divider. So it's going to create these little spaces where the bats can roost. So it's also been shown the more baffles you have, the more successful the bat house is. So at minimum, you really want to have at least 2 baffles in there to give 3 different compartments of where the bats can roost. Again, you're going to want one more little air vent on the side. So this should be kind of small, about 6 inches tall, about a 1/2 inch wide. The spacers, you're going to need spacers to put in between each kind of baffle. Those spacers should not exceed 1 inch. So 3/4 to 1 inch will be just fine in between each one. And then again, we have the roof. And then if you were to put the side panel on, this is what it would look like. You'd have the side of the bat house, a little air vent on the side, and the landing pad down here. So if you want to think of this in terms of how many pieces of wood you're really going to need, you're going to need a back piece. So the back piece, you want to just account for the total length of the bat house. So that includes the 2 feet of the house as well as the landing pad, which would be like down here. You're going to have 2 front panels, one that is larger, one that is smaller. This one should be 6 inches tall, and then however wide you decide to make your bat house. So this one can be whatever that sums up to 2 feet, or it can be taller, up to you. The baffles will need to be the same dimension as the total length of the front of the bat house. So if it's 2 feet, your baffles are going to need to be about 2 feet. Maybe they're going to be bigger. You'll also need 2 side pieces with those air vents. So each side has an air vent cut into it. You want to cut this at a slant for the roof, and then you also are going to need spacers, and you should also cut the spacers with that same kind of slant so that they fit nicely in the bat house. And then you'll just need a piece for the roof. Not shown here, but you can also have roof shingles to make this more waterproofer if you'd like to do that. What's really important here is that you texturize the wood for the bat house. So that back piece, as well as all of the baffles, need to be roughed up. There's lots of different techniques for doing this. I've seen in a lot of different tutorials that you can cut horizontal grooves, and they really recommend that the grooves be about 1/4 to a 1/2 inch apart and pretty shallow, so 132 to 116 inch deep. And this has been raved about as the worst part of building a bat house, as this takes a lot of time, especially when you have more baffles. This is going to be really time consuming. And this is important, right? Because the bats need texture to hold on to. If it's flat, they're going to have a very hard time attaching to the house and living in there. So make sure it's nice and roughed up. Here's two examples of finished bat houses. This one, the landing pad it should be a little bit bigger and it should be roughed up, but you can see at least the air vent. You can also see that this person just kind of made it out of maybe wood they had lying around. And this one is a nice one. This one's from Conserve Wildlife. So you can see this has a nice landing pad down here. It has the air vent here. It has the side vents. And then it also has shingles on top. When it comes to installation, the best place to install a bat house is actually on the side of your house or a side of a building. Second best place is on a post. The bat house should be 10 to 15 feet off the ground, sometimes even higher up. That might even be better. In the north, it should be facing south or southwest, and this is for the purpose of receiving a lot of sunlight, right? You want this to become a roosting habitat. So this is a place where the bats are going to stay nice and warm. So you want it to be in a place where it's not blocked by any shade, where it's receiving a maximum amount of sunlight. If you do have the only option of attaching it to a tree, it does need to be in a sunny location or it's not going to be inviting for the bats. Also, if you're going to put the bat house on a tree, you want to make sure that the bat house is away from the forest line. And that's because you're going to make those bats more prone to predation by putting them closer to the forest. So you can install your bat house any time of the year. It's best to install it before May, before they come in for their summer roosts. So if you are inspired, you can make one during the winter and then you can put it up in the spring. But there's really no timeline or deadline to have a bat house out. You do, as I was mentioning earlier, you need to be within a 1/4 mile of a reliable water source. So that can be a stream, river, or lake. I guess you could also try to leave out some water for the bats in like a bird bath or something. But again, needs to be in distance of a reliable water source. Because the bats, they poop a lot, you do not want to install a bat house over a walkway or someplace where you don't want that area to be disturbed by bat guano. You also don't want this to be near any sort of artificial light source because these organisms are nocturnal. And if you're going to put it on a post or a tree, make sure that you put in some sort of predator guard. So that's like usually some sort of metal sheet. It can stick outwards, or you can actually just wrap part of the post in like a metal, and that will make it a lot harder for predators to kind of climb up the post and get to the bats. You can attach it to a building or post, a lot of different methods. I've seen a lot of people use these T-shaped brackets to do this. You can also just go ahead and attach these little beams on the back of it and then nail or screw it into whatever building you have. In terms of maintenance, you really don't need to have a lot of maintenance for bat houses. You really just want to get out like around once a year and you want to check the bat house for any sort of damage it might have. So maybe if the paint is chipping off or if there's water getting in there, you're going to want to repaint and recaulk it. Always check for wasp and hornet nests because those can also form in there. And if that does happen, you can just remove the nests in the springtime before the bats come in for their summer roost. So some things to keep in mind from what I've said so far. This is like a basic outline of how to make a bat house. There's a lot of different designs and approaches out there. These measurements are based off of batcon.org and Conserve Wildlife, and there's been a lot of research into what works best for bats. So those are the best guidelines to go for. You can also get really great free designs for bat houses on batcon.org. You can just go on their website, look for the bat houses, and they have very detailed instructions and pictures to go along with that. Really important that this habitat for them stays nice and dry. So you want to caulk the bat house before you're screwing or nailing any pieces together. So when you put like the spacers in, you would caulk first, then you would nail or screw in. And the same goes for putting any pieces together. You want to make sure all of the seams are really well caulked. You do not want to paint the interior of the bat house. Remember that this has to be texturized. And so if you paint it, it's going to fill in those grooves and the bats are not going to be able to cling on to that. It's really recommended that you don't use any sort of mesh to texturize the interior because this can degrade over time, and it's been shown to like not be any more effective than just putting in grooves. Like I said earlier, you can also stain the inside pieces of the bat house with a water-based dark stain. And with this, like you could decorate it in other ways. It doesn't just have to be a solid color, but you do want to keep the colors dark because you want to keep the bat house warm. So in terms of best practices, the bigger the bat house, the better. So if you can get it to be wider, taller, more baffles in there, that would be really great. However, bats do move into the smaller ones as well. It's just been shown that those bigger ones, especially the wider ones with more baffles, have been more successful. If you can, please mount it to the side of a building instead of on a tree. And again, if you're going to mount into a tree, please keep it away from the tree line. We don't want to set the bats up for failure by making them unnecessarily exposed to predators. It's also really good and suggested to install multiple bat houses next to each other. And that has been shown to be more successful than just installing one bat house. Also, if you can get it higher up off the ground, that's better. So I gave the range of 10 to 15. If you can even get it up to 20 feet off the ground, that's really beneficial. Always make sure that the bat house is properly sealed. And if bats do move into your bat house, you do want to share this information with Conserve Wildlife because they monitor bat populations. And you can do this by emailing Stephanie at Conserve Wildlife. If anybody wants to write this down, just leave this up for a second. Or you can also call Conserve Wildlife New Jersey at 609-984-0621. So just going to leave this up for a second. I can also put this in the chat later. All right, moving on to insect houses. I just want to preface this one by saying that unlike the bat houses, there has not been a lot of research done in this field. So there's some best practices, but overall, a lot of this is unknown, especially in terms of how efficient these are. But from what I could find, I did find that Michigan State University, they had some really nice resources for this. So a bit about insects. So these are invertebrates, meaning they don't have backbones. They are the most diverse group of organisms on the planet. And we've identified currently over 900,000 species, and it's predicted that there's perhaps over 1 million, maybe even several million kinds of insect species. And so much like bats and all other organisms, their biggest threats are going to come from anthropogenic stressors, mainly habitat loss. So the more forests and habitats we get rid of, the less habitat that is available for these organisms. These organisms are also sensitive to pesticides and pollution. So again, some insects are beneficial, some are not. So we want to promote the beneficial ones. And some species of insects have also co-evolved with plant species. So when we come in, we destroy habitat, or invasive species come in that can disrupt their relationships. So insects that that rely on a plant that maybe has been kicked out of the area due to invasive species will then put in danger another insect, and vice versa. So we want to, again, create habitat where we can, especially in places that we can control it, like our own backyards. So insects are providing, despite being annoying sometimes, they are providing a lot of ecosystem services to us, especially in terms of pollination, which is directly related to food production. They're also playing a really important role in the decomposition of food and organic materials in the environment, and therefore cycling nutrients throughout the planet. They also are their own form of pest control as well. Some insects are going to predate on other ones. And lastly, the fun fact I have here is that the state insect of New Jersey is the honeybee, which it's not really that unique because many other states also have the honeybee as their state insect. So you might have come across something called a bug hotel, and it might look something like this. And so from the research I've done on this, there's not a whole lot of evidence to show that this is beneficial, and actually it might be causing more damage than benefits. And that's because these are really large and it's full of a lot of different substrates. And so while it might seem like supporting a variety of environments is beneficial, a lot of the times this is actually promoting conflicting environments. Different insects are going to require different sorts of environmental factors. Some might prefer a more dry habitat, whereas others are going to prefer a more wet or damp environment. Some prefer shade, some prefer sunlight. So putting them all into one place and then perhaps having a shaded environment next to a wet environment, next to what's supposed to be a sunny environment, they kind of clash, and they can actually support destructive behaviors. So things like disease spreading and things like that. These are also very hard to maintain. They're really big, and there's no way that you can effectively clean and maintain this over time. So really what you want to do with these with these insect houses is to cater to specific insects instead of just building a massive bug hotel. And so if you're interested in supporting beetles and centipedes and things like that in your garden, you're going to construct a different bat house than if you want to support solitary bees, for example. And so this has everything to do with the substrate you choose. So if you're going to put twigs and bark, that's going to more so support centipedes and beetles, whereas bamboo tubes and plant stems, those are more so going to attract solitary bees and wasps. If you are interested in bringing lots of different insects into your backyard, consider building different insect houses that cater to those specific organisms rather than putting them all into one. And while the bat house doesn't really require too much maintenance, these bug and insect houses do. So if you don't have the time or energy to maintain a bug or insect house, don't build one. This is especially true for the houses for bees. And we'll get into why that is. So here's some examples of the substrates you can use that are going to attract different inhabitants. So like I was saying, the solitary bees and the wasps, those prefer like bamboo and stems. So they prefer habitats that are tube-like, whereas beetles and centipedes, millipedes, spiders, they're going to prefer more of that like stick leaf kind of habitat. Two very different kinds of habitats, right? So I'll give some examples of bug houses that are a little better designed. So this one, as you can see, is not nearly as big as the other bug hotel, and it also has more clustered and related substrates. So pine cones, twigs, leaves, some grass. This is going to call attention to those centipedes and beetles kinds of organisms. This one is really tiny. This is cute. It's in a garden, and it's just got some twigs and pine cones and such in there. And what's important about these is that it's just providing stacked habitat with lots of nooks in it that insects can get into. So one thing I just maybe wouldn't recommend is putting these straws inside of there, because this is going to attract solitary bees. But you do want to stick with clusters of similar substrates. So twigs, bark, leaves, those are all good together, and then hollowed out tubes and wood, that's more specifically going to be for bees. So things you might find if you put like a small one in your garden, you might come to find that there's grasshoppers, worms, beetles, slugs, ants, and even some snails in there. So if those are organisms you're interested in bringing into your garden or backyard, stick with the leaves, the barks, the twigs kind of substrate. However, if you're interested in bringing solitary bees into your backyard, you can do that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about their life cycle. So they prefer these tubes because this is actually the way that they reproduce. So they're going to mate in around the springtime, and then they're going to go into the tubes and they're going to lay these kind of like create these little bedrooms, almost these little cells where their offspring are going to be. So they're going to build like this wall, then they're going to put a pollen mass with an egg, another wall, pollen mass, egg, and they do this from the back of the tube all the way to the front of the tube. And then over time, that egg is going to create the larva. The larva is going to eventually metamorphose into the adult bee, and then the cycle starts all over again. So tube habitat for solitary bees, that's specific for these bees. And so there's a couple things when it comes to creating these bee hotels. So you can go about creating bundles of tunnel nesting habitat. So that can be bamboo or plant stems of different sorts, or it can be a block of wood in which you've drilled multiple different holes and tubes into it. So when it comes to the bamboo and stems and things like that, you want to create clusters of them. So you can bundle them together with string or zip ties, whatever you kind of have around. And you want to have different sets of them because you're going to rotate them later on when you're maintaining the bee hotel. When you're going about drilling holes in a wooden block, so this can just be like wood you have lying around, or this can be like fallen trees. Maybe you want to take a tree stump and drill holes into it. What's important here is that you drill a variety of holes with a variety of depth and diameter. So the general rule is that you want to increase the tube depth with increasing diameter. So this tube here is going to be deeper and wider than this one. So when it comes to the specific size, this is the specifications, 332 to 3/8 inch in diameter. And that's because those solitary bees, they're going to prefer different sized tubes. So different bees are going to come into these specified tubes. And then what you're going to do, you can mix and match. You can either have a house with strictly these tubes, or you can have one with just the wooden blocks, or you can put them in together. And you can do that by putting them into a frame. So here's some examples I got from the University of Michigan. They build a lot of really nice ones. So you can see here that they just took some like logs and drilled some holes into them, and then there's lots of tubes around it. I do also want to note that if you're going to drill holes inside of logs and such, those holes need to be really smooth. And so you need to pay special attention to that, because if you create holes and tubes that are jagged on the inside, it might damage the bees' wings and such, and so that won't be any service to them. You do want to have some sort of roof on it as well, because you don't want this to be too wet. So I'm going to talk more specifically about the bee houses, because these are the ones that are a bit more challenging to maintain. You will know if bees have moved into the tubes, if you see this. Basically, the tubes become plugged up, and that's because the bees have gone in there. They've laid their different egg masses, and then they've kind of sealed it off. So this is an example of a really cute one. So if you're going to install one of these, much like the bat house, you want to put this in a sunny location. So it's best to put it either on a post or a tree. I've seen it more recommended that you put it on a post than anything. So you want the house to be mounted 4 to 5 feet off of the ground, and you want it to be facing south, southwest, wherever it's going to receive that direct sunlight, especially in the morning. You can also put these on the sides of buildings, much like the bat houses. So where the bats required that they be near to that water source, it's really important for the bees that you have different plants in your yard, or at least in your neighborhood, that they can feed on. So this needs to be plants that are flowering and blooming in the spring and summer, so that they can feed during that egg laying process. When it comes to maintenance, this is where things get kind of tricky. So I've just put some of the maintenance here. There's a lot more to it than this. So if you're interested in that, this source from Michigan State University Extension, Building and Maintaining Bee Hotels for Wild Bees, this is a really excellent source for this. So these bee hotels are actually prone to several different things, one of them being parasitism by wasps. Also pests and different diseases. So you don't want to just create a bee hotel, hang it on a tree, and leave it there forever. You actually have basically a seasonal obligation to rotate the sets of tubes and the nesting material so that they're not being unnecessarily exposed to diseases. So it's recommended that you have 2 or more sets of tubes and nesting material that you can rotate out. So in the spring, you're going to put out a fresh set of nesting material, and then you'll take whatever's used and you'll clean that. So for the tubes, you can use a pipe cleaner or something similar to scrub out those used tubes after the bees have come out and they've metamorphosed and everything. And then you're going to wash them in a mixture of bleach and water. So it's going to be a half a cup of bleach to every gallon of water. And you're going to rinse out the tubes and the wood blocks. You're going to rinse them in that mixture. Then you're going to rinse them again in clean water, and then you're going to dry them for an entire season. And then again, you're going to rotate these out. So if one year you put nesting material in, it was used, then you take that out, you put in a new set, and then your job then is to clean that other nesting material. If that's too much maintenance, you can also just throw that nesting material out. But every 2 years, you will need to completely replace the nesting materials. And this helps protect the bees from diseases that might thrive in that kind of environment. Throughout the nesting period, you're going to want to monitor for parasitic wasps. Maybe you want to keep an eye out for birds that are coming in for the insects. The bees are also prone to ant infestation, so you want to make sure that if ants have gotten into the habitat, that you maybe move your bee house to a different location. If there's spiders taking up space in your bee hotel, that means there's something wrong. That means that you're usually in too shady of a spot. And you also want to monitor the bee hotel for moisture. They like it sunny and dry. So with that being said, that's the end of this presentation, and I'm happy to take your questions at this time. And this is the winter reading code.